Welcome everyone. Many thanks for being here today in our seminar. We are using today hybrid mode, so we have some people here in the room and some others online. So we hope that works well. For those of you who doesn't know us, CLAREC is the Cambridge Latin American Research in Education Collective, and we are based at the Faculty of Education in the University of Cambridge. Our aim is to constitute a space for Latin American perspective, aiming to make visible the region knowledge production in the field of educational research towards the diversification and decolonization of academia. For this term, we have put together a series of seminars named CLAREC Whereabouts, where we have members of our collective presenting their work. And we are very happy to have today Anna Maria Del Fiorentino presenting Mothers and Daughters, Intertwined Memories, Healing Trauma, and the Rupture with Paid Domestic Work in Brazil. We have organized this seminar in this topic today to commemorate a relevant day happening tomorrow, the 8th of March, International Women's Day, as a form of acknowledge the struggle of many women around the world and specifically in Latin America that are still resisting patriarchy and fighting for equality. I remind you that the seminar today is being recorded, and for this occasion, it's gonna last a little longer than usual, so it's gonna be 1 hour and a half. If you have to leave before the question time, you can leave your questions in the chat and we will pass them through Anna Maria. And during the seminar, you can still post your questions in the chat also, and we will have the question time at the end and we will read the questions. So now I'll leave you with Juliana, who is online, and she will present our speaker. Over to you, Juliana.
Thank you, Consul. So, Anna Maria. Anna lives in the UK since 2008 and is the mother of 2 children. Her research interests are related to themes of maternity and motherhood, dignity in childhood and adolescence, human rights, inclusive feminism, social justice, LGBTQI+, and anti-racism movements. Born and raised in Brazil, Anna has a bachelor's degree in economics from the Universidade Estadual de Campinas, Unicamp. She worked as financial controller at Ericsson's Research and Development Center in Brazil, and was project manager at Banco do Brasil in the UK. In London, where she worked as a volunteer in theater and cinema at the Old Vic Tunnel. She has a Master's of Philosophy in Latin American Studies from the University of Cambridge, finished last year. Anna is also the author of the book Memórias Entrelaçadas, do Trauma ao Empoderamento, Intertwined Memories, Transforming Trauma into Empowerment. The book is based on her master's dissertation and was published in Brazil in 2021. Anna will talk about her master's research work today. Her study highlights the life stories of mothers that are paid domestic workers and school cleaners in Brazil and their daughters, the first generation of women university entrants to obtain a high education degree within their families. At the core of Anna's research is a question on how to combine women's empowerment through higher education with how to combine women's empowerment through higher education with happier individuals, combining upward social mobility with good mental health, bringing positive, lasting change for generations to come. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliana, for introducing me. Thank you, CLAREC. Thank you to the Faculty of Education for being here today. A particular thanks to Alex for inviting me to be here today and share a little bit of my dissertation research work about the first generation of women who went to university in Brazil and their mothers, domestic workers. So the driving force behind my studies is related to my own experience of motherhood and what is perceived to be women's work. When I was a full-time mom, I noticed that despite working more than ever before, when I had my corporate career, people would often ask if I didn't get bored of having so much free time. Other people, on a more positive note, would suggest that I took the opportunity to use this spare time to pursue personal projects. And I struggled to see where those people were seeing this spare time because I couldn't see that spare time. And I realized that the work I did as a full-time mom, as caring for 2 children, was invisible to others. So only later, when I was doing my academic work, I came in touch with the concept of reproductive work, or simply put, as what is perceived as women's work, an invisible work produced by women. It can be paid or unpaid and is indispensable to the maintenance of reproduction, the productive labor force. Includes cooking, cleaning, and caring for the elderly, the sick, and the children. On Duffy's paper, she explained how reproductive work is completely linked to the gender and racial division of labor. She calls the dirty work the tasks that are historically performed by no white women. So there is this division between women doing reproductive work based on race, and highlights the central role of reproductive work perpetuating women's subordination as domestic activities are devaluated and remain largely defined in contrast to work. Paid domestic work has been in the spotlight in the last years. Lots of movies about it in Brazil, from Mexico, and from the US. I will give you a little bit of context about paid domestic work in Brazil. So domestic work is an important source of employment for women in Brazil. 92% of domestic workers are women, and 63% of them are Black women. It is one of the highest Brazil has one of the highest numbers of domestic works in the world. And domestic work is one of the largest occupational groups for women in the country. About almost 15% of women are domestic workers in Brazil. They receive the lowest wages, are subject to constant discrimination, harassment, violence, and abandonment. There was some progress towards the domestic work in the country with the constitutional reform in 2013 and its associated law in 2015 that established equal rights for domestic workers, but still the occupation is highly informal. And one thing that started happening in the last years is that the occupation starts aging. So young women in Brazil are escaping from this occupation. And I was interested to understand a little bit more why they are escaping from it or how. And to understand that, it's important to give you a context about higher education in Brazil in recent years. There were some important governmental programs that widened access to higher education in the country during the 2000s, and that drove many to be the first generation university entrants within their families because of the affirmative actions such as racial quotas, the expansion and creation of funding programs for higher education in the country, and the expansion of network of federal universities that focus on deprived areas of the country. Still, some will argue that the efforts were not enough, as students with a privileged background were still occupying the limited numbers of places available at the public and elite universities. The commodification of higher education led disadvantaged ones to low quality education in the private sector, which benefit a growing number of new for-profit institutions. So just a quick note that higher education in Brazil is different from here. Public universities that are state funded or federal funded, they are free, while private universities are charge fees. The starting point of my research was Preta Hara's book, Me, Domestic Worker. The Maze Room is the Modern Slave Quarters. She started a hashtag campaign in 2016, asking domestic workers to send her testimonials about exploitation and abuse at work. The campaign became this book that was published in 2019. And one thing that I realized when I was reading those testimonials is that the memories of domestic workers were overwhelmingly narrated by somebody else, either their daughters or granddaughters, sometimes their sons, not themselves. And despite all the recent progress, widening access to higher education through the government programs, most daughters and sons, they would make their mothers accountable for their educational achievements and for their social mobility after obtaining an university degree. Another thing that caught my attention is that more than half of the stories were from both daughters and sons about their mothers' life stories, were mixed with their own memories because they usually accompanied their mothers to work when they were little, before they had the age to start school. That led to my research questions, that why domestic workers' voices were so faint in this campaign about themselves, differently from other testimonial campaigns such as Me Too, in which the stories are overwhelmingly narrated in the first person. And why daughters and sons make their mothers accountable for their educational achievements. What is the role of this mother in this process? More than just acknowledging social mobility in a material sense, I wanted to investigate how the experiences in early childhood affected the daughter's well-being and mental health in adulthood, a novel approach to explore lifelong generational inequalities. I interviewed 5 pairs of mothers and daughters from Brazil. The criteria for choosing these women is that mothers had to be or have been domestic workers providing service in a private house. But I also took a couple of mothers who were school cleaners. The daughters had to be the first generation in their families to obtain a higher education degree, either academic or professional, and they should have started university during the 2000s and had finished before I interviewed them. My work happened in an extraordinary context of the global pandemic, so I wasn't able to go to Brazil and speak to these women in person. What I did, I did audio recorded diaries and exchange of text messages with these women. My research starts exploring 3 main dimensions related to the experiences of these women, that are memory, trauma, and silence. So I realized that the mothers' experiences of trauma and abuse were often present in their daughters' memories and identities when I spoke to them. To understand that, I had to explore the intergenerational transmission of memories between mothers and daughters. And I decided to build my theory based on the post-memory theory of Hish, using my own context, which is acute poverty and multiple oppressions these mothers experienced. I noticed that trauma was the driving force, leading mothers to prioritize their daughters' education. They highly object their daughters following the same path they follow as domestic workers. Their traumatic experiences were told partially by themselves and also by their daughters. And I noticed the daughter's resentment related to the share of their mother's traumas, kind of genetic trauma. To understand more about trauma, there are different types of trauma, and I identified 3 of them in the narratives of the women I spoke to. Psychological trauma refers to the critical experiences that affect how people function, such as emotional abuse, as well as neglect. Social trauma, referring to social conditions that perpetuate forms of oppression against minorities, such as racism and other discriminations. And secondary trauma, or the genetic trauma I mentioned, that refers to the stress experienced by family, friends, or professionals as a result of their empathy while caring for others that experience traumatic events or ongoing trauma. I noticed that the stories of trauma often encountered silence as response. Many of the information were forgotten or omitted when I was talking to those women. Silence is also associated with traumatic memories, such as guilt and embarrassment, and therefore more connected to remembrance rather than forgetting. Silence is also used to protect the younger generation from the scars of their parents. Pollack called those silence memory underground memories, and he argues that they are kept alive under informal ways of communication transmitted within families or specific groups. Differently from the official collective memory, it's not generally available. So I will share with you the stories from the mothers, domestic workers, which I call a silent strength. Based on the interviews I made, I will focus the talk here on their life stories because I want to bring forward those women's stories rather than focusing too much on my research work. So one of the mothers told me, when I asked her about what she thinks about her life, she told me, "I believe I have the perfect life." When I spoke to her daughter, she has a very different perspective. She told me that as a young child, she's the youngest child, she recalls that she witnessed her mother's worst moments, as by the time she was born, her mother lost all her hopes and was full of resentment because of her traumatic life experiences. Her mother had 5 children, and one was born with intellectual disability. She struggled to work and to provide additional care to her child with special needs. She told me it was a very difficult time and perhaps I have abandoned them, her children, a little bit. She caught up with her secondary education when she was 45 and passed a test to be a cleaner in a public office. This new job brought her stability and a higher income that allowed her to pay for English lessons for her daughter, as well as a 1-year preparation course to help her daughter to pass the university admission test. Not only this kind of help, but she also told me that when her daughter were living outside the family home and studying, I brought her homemade food every week. I washed her clothes, brought stuff in and out, you know, those things that only a mother would do. When I spoke to another woman, another mother, Victoria, she described her hometown as it is cruel there because she came from the remote northeastern backlands of the country. She told me her family was very poor. Her parents needed their children to help work in their land. They have a small family farm. And the siblings and herself have to walk long distances on foot to school. Because of that, they ended up leaving school before finishing primary education. I will share with you this video of her telling a little bit about her story.
Meu nome é Cleide, tenho 53 anos, sou do Ceará e quero contar um pouquinho da minha história quando eu era pré-adolescente. Era muita dificuldade no tempo da escola, né? Eu queria muito fazer a 5ª série pelo menos, porque para mim era um sonho, né? Ter um pouco de estudo. Só que era muito difícil, o caminho que a gente fazia o percurso era muito longo e chegou um certo momento que eu até cansei e desisti. Não era para ter desistido, mas eu desisti pela dificuldade, né? A distância, para vocês terem uma ideia, era tão grande, eram 10 quilômetros que eu tinha que andar a pé, todo dia tinha que ir e voltar. Isso fora 10 porteiras que a gente tinha que pular. Não era nem abrir e fechar, era pular por cima.
Yeah, so she migrated to the southwest of the country near São Paulo when she was 21 years old, left this difficult condition she had in the northeastern of the country, and she had to leave her 1-year-old daughter behind with her parents. The first job she found near São Paulo was as domestic worker, and she lived in her employer's house, and she couldn't afford living elsewhere, and worked from 6 a.m. until 10, 11 p.m. The employers didn't pay her overtime. Her wage was below the minimum wage. And she told me that her employer searched her belongings on a regular basis, looking for stolen items. The employer also stalked her with her car when she left the house. She got really upset remembering those things and told me, I don't like to talk about it because I get so nervous that it makes me shiver. After 3 years working in this first job, she found a new one and told her employer she was leaving. She told me that her employer did not accept it well and started arguing, shouting at her, banging and kicking doors after leaving the room. She told me if I had let down my guard, she would probably have hit me. She worked for 2 other families as domestic worker since this first job and has been in the current job for 27 years. She had a second daughter that lived with her, and this one went to university. I was originally planning to gather information only about the daughters who were the first generation who went to university, but in this case, I wanted to know a bit more about the daughter she left behind in the Northeast. And she told me I was father and mother at the same time, and she had to send money for her mother to raise her daughter on a regular basis every month. The only contact she had with her daughter was through telephone, mostly via her mother. And she visited her in very few occasions because not only it's far away from São Paulo, but it's very expensive to do the trip. Her daughter had problems at school in the Northeastern, and she was important to help her because of the distance. She told me that her mother gave up sending her daughter to school when she was 14 years old. She is very bitter when she talks about this daughter, and she told me that the daughter is useless because she didn't want to study. This daughter ended up leaving school before her mother did, and this separation strained their relationship. Victoria saw them 3 years ago when she visited Ceará, but she avoids contact with this daughter. She was telling me that this daughter from the Northeast has recently given birth to her 3rd child, coincidentally in the same month that Elena's other daughter had her first baby. Her relationship with her other daughter, who she was not separated from, is completely different. They have a good relationship, and she's also very present in her grandchildren's life. She paid for her daughter's university tuition fees and has been providing further financial aid since Helena left home. She told me that her daughter struggles to make ends meet because she is a primary school teacher. Her other daughter, on the other hand, receives no support and is trapped in the same challenging environment that her mother experienced herself and escaped from, experiencing all sorts of deprivations. Dandara is another mother I spoke to. She is the only woman who declared herself a Black woman, and she started telling me that I had no opportunities in life. She told me her mother was married at the age of 11, and her mother's grandmother was an enslaved person. She started working when she was 13 in a textile factory to help her parents, and also worked as a cleaner in a school for many years. She's now retired, but works on her family's food stall, and she caught up with primary education when she was an adult. She lives in a poor community in São Paulo, and she was very concerned to have her children raised on the streets. So she was constantly looking for learning opportunities to keep them busy. The reason for that is that she is very conscious of the structural racism in the country and how her family as Black people are highly vulnerable because of their race. She empowered her children since their early age, and she told me that she always told them that they could achieve anything a white person could achieve. She and her husband did not want their children to work before finishing secondary education, so they nurture an intellectual environment at home, using to give her daughter Teresa a book at the end of every school year. She told me that they gave her daughter so many books that now her daughter has her own book. And she's referring to an academic book that her daughter has published and is now in a second edition. Another mother I talked to, Val, was born and raised in her parents' small farm in a remote location in the south of the country. Her father was against women receiving education, and differently from her brothers, she and her sister could not pursue education after their finished primary school. She told me, we paid a high price for that. She migrated to the city to work as a domestic worker, and she's been working for the same family for 32 years. She told me that because of the pandemic, she had to change her work arrangements, and she's been living at work for 20 days, followed by 15 days at her own place since July 2020. When she is living with her employers, she has to put her life on hold, and she cannot see her boyfriend or family or go to doctor appointments. And she also had to leave her second job because her employers are elderly and more at risk of dying of COVID. So they are isolating together. She experienced something that Silva calls a social death of the land worker. When she moved from a rural property to an urban area, she saw all her skills, all her talents useless in the city. She told me, I did all the farm work, but I didn't do the house chores, which is now what I do for a living. I didn't wash, I didn't do the ironing, I didn't cook. She also felt less cultured than other people. She couldn't understand conversations around her and struggled to engage in conversation because she had difficulty speaking Portuguese correctly. Even today, she says she can't speak Portuguese, but she is aware that she has improved. She told me domestic workers like her are invisible, and other people do not value her work and think that the person that cleans bathroom and cleans floors only does that because they are incapable of doing anything else. That was the main reason why she encouraged her daughter to go to university. She wanted her daughter's work to be recognized. Her ex-husband didn't help financially, and she was abused by him, leaving him 3 years after meeting him. And her daughter accompanied her to work until she was 2 years old. Then she had to send her to a full-time nursery paid by her. She also caught up with secondary education when she was an adult in the evenings, and also attended a course to be a receptionist. She told me that she dreamed of doing a professional college course, but had to dismiss it because she was working long hours. She told me she could have pursued a different career, but opted to stay at her job as domestic worker. Otherwise, she would not be able to support her daughter to go to university. That's because her employers paid part of her daughter's university fees. Her daughter went to a private university and the fees were very expensive. She also paid for part of her daughter's tuition fees, for books, materials, food, and transport. For that, she had to work more hours and save money to support her daughter at university. I learned when I was talking to her daughter that she did not live with her mother when from 6 to 13 years old. When I went back to her mother to ask what happened, she told me that she forgot to mention that. and that Paula lived with her father and her paternal grandparents. The reason for that is because when her daughter reached 6 years old and went to primary school, her mother struggled with childcare because there was no free full-time education available. She couldn't afford childcare, and she was a single woman with a full-time job. She was telling me that even if she had the money for childcare, she wouldn't be able to leave her job in the afternoon and pick her daughter from school. And so she ended up allowing the daughter to move back with her ex-husband and the paternal grandparents. She saw her daughter at the weekends and provided for food and other needs on a weekly basis because her ex-husband struggled to keep a job. The daughter moved back with her when she was 13, and she found it difficult to live with her conservative father. When she moved back with her mother paid her to go to a private secondary school, also paid for a college degree in advertising and marketing. And after that, her daughter was offered a paid trainee place related to her degree, and another one when she was at university by the company that hired her on a permanent basis after her graduation, where she still works when I interviewed her. Another mother, Carmen, told me that she was very young when she got married. She was 18, just so straight after finishing secondary education. She was a full-time mother until her younger child reached 10. After that, she worked cooking at nurseries and schools and a shop assistant as well. Her most recently worked as domestic worker for 8 years with the same family. She told me she left her job to work in a hotel after obtaining a professional degree that qualified her to design meals for diabetics. She was the only mother I interviewed that obtained a university degree herself. She studied cookery when she was 47 years old, not long after her daughter obtained her degree. She told me she was unable to support her daughter to pay for her professional degree in beauty, but help her in other ways, encouraging her not to be a housewife and to pursue financial independence. She did not want her daughter to be a simple housewife and mother. When I spoke to the daughters, I had this quote in mind from Abigail McKnight, that is, a society in which the success or failure of children with equal ability rests on the social and economic status of their parents is not a fair one. So higher education has an important role providing young people from working class backgrounds the ability to move into professional occupations after obtaining a degree. In Brazil, 21% of women and 15% of men have a university degree. Although women have more degrees than men, Black women are still 2.3 times behind white women and 10% behind men that obtained one. There's also a pay gap between women's ages compared to their male counterparts. Lucia is one of the daughters, and she was telling me that she and her brother accompanied their mother Marilla to work on a daily basis from 4 until they were 6 years old, so just before they started school. Her mother's work shift as school cleaner was from 2 in the afternoon until 11 in the evening, and she had to carry her daughter back home because the daughter was exhausted by that time. She helped her mother cleaning desks and gathering dirt from the floor and spent the rest of her time at the school library. She told me that her passion for books, literature, and narratives in general might have started there in this very unlikely context. And I have this special video to share today from Juliana, who's hearing us. She was not part of my research work. I met her when I finished my master's degree, but she is also the first generation in her family to go to the university, and she recorded this video for us.
Oi, meu nome é Juliana, eu sou brasileira, nasci em São Paulo, no interior de São Paulo, e eu fiz o meu mestrado em Cambridge. Meu mestrado foi em educação, e eu também fui parte da Sociedade Brasileira de Estudantes em Cambridge. Eu ia com a minha mãe fazer as faxinas, eu ajudava a minha mãe, Então, desde criança, eu fui crescendo nas casas de diferentes pessoas. E nessas casas tinham bibliotecas, tinham livros. E tinha uma em especial que eu sempre ia e limpava a biblioteca, que era o lugar que eu mais gostava. A minha mãe, ela não pôde estudar quando criança, porque na família dela eles moravam num sítio, e eles trabalhavam, né, nesse sítio, e aí a tia da minha mãe falou que menina ia pra escola para namorar. Então a minha avó não colocou a minha mãe na escola e nem a irmã da minha mãe, a minha tia. Eu fiquei sabendo que a minha mãe ela aprendeu a ler já depois dos seus 40 anos, porque quando eu era pequena, eu lembro da minha mãe indo na escola e eu indo com ela à noite.
And going back to Lucia, another daughter that I interviewed, she told me that she followed her older siblings' steps and left her parents' home to go to college in São Paulo. She was determined to pursue a professional degree and enter the job market quickly. She told me no one in her family had an academic degree, so she lacked parameters at home, but she knew she wouldn't be like her parents. She began to grow a motivation to pursue an academic degree in languages and literature. She started a one-year preparatory course for university paid by her mother, along with English lessons on Saturdays, also paid by her mother. She also started working as an English teacher. Her mother, however, wanted her to become a civil servant instead. And Lucia, the daughter, told me that since she was 18 years old, her mother has been telling her to pass the test and become a civil servant and have a steady job. Lucia ended up passing the university entrance tests and studied language and literature at the University of São Paulo, which is one of the most prestigious universities in Brazil and Latin America. It is free and state-funded. She's the only daughter I interviewed that did her undergraduate studies in a public university. She's also the only daughter I interviewed that did not live with her parents when she was at university. She had to work during her studies to pay for her living costs, and she had the opportunity to work in 2 paid internships at the university at the same time she was teaching English. By the end of her course, she was promised a permanent job at the university, but the offer was canceled at the last moment. Her mental health highly deteriorated, and she was jobless by the time she graduated. She had depression and had to move back to her parents' house. This unemployment experience made her dismiss further academic ambitions. She decided to study and pass a test to become a civil servant and have a steady job instead of pursuing a master's degree in education. That's what she originally wanted. She passed the test to be a civil servant and has been working in a part-time job since then. The steady income and spare time allowed her to have a comfortable life and to pursue other projects, including a master's in education that she wanted at University of São Paulo. She was also able to provide financial help to her parents, and she believes that civil service is responsible for her social mobility rather than having a university degree. When I spoke to Teresa is the only daughter I interviewed that declared herself as a Black woman. She told me she was very keen to have a profession that would prepare her to have the skills to help people that were victims of inequalities, such as Black people. That was something that always affected her. And going to university was her way of doing it. And I have this special video of her as well to share, telling.
Olá, meu nome é Cláudia Adão, sou brasileira, moro em São Paulo, tenho 40 anos, sou filha da Margarida e do Cláudio, neta da Alcina, do Rosalino, da Maria Nésia e do Antônio. Eu tive a oportunidade de participar da pesquisa de Ana, compartilhando como a minha mãe, a Margarida, que grande parte da sua vida profissional trabalhou como servente e depois cozinheira e vendedora de acarajé, como ela me apoiou durante todo o meu processo de vida e meu processo educacional, né? Eu sou assistente social, doula, doutoranda em arquitetura e urbanismo pela faculdade, né, pela Universidade de São Paulo. E todo esse processo teve uma participação muito grande da minha mãe, com muito incentivo, né, à leitura, me acompanhando na escola, me apoiando nas situações de racismo que eu vivenciei. Eu tenho uma passagem bem interessante que, quando eu tinha mais ou menos uns 9 anos, estava indo para a 4ª série, a minha mãe estava me ajudando a encapar os cadernos, algo que ela fazia sempre, e numas tarefas. Aí tinha ali uma conta que ela não estava conseguindo fazer. Ela falou: olha, filha, a mãe consegue ir só até aqui, mas que sua mãe não consegue ir, né? E aí, anos depois, né, lembrando, né, dessa passagem, eu vi que a minha mãe não foi só até ali, né? Todo o apoio que ela me deu, o incentivo, fez com que eu tivesse mais segurança para continuar tentando, sabe? Então ela tá comigo em todos os processos. Ela não me ajudou naquela conta, mas ela me ajudou a ter mais autoestima, a ter confiança, a ter mais recursos para enfrentar diversas situações aí, e como uma mulher negra, né, numa sociedade extremamente racista como a brasileira, teve que passar. Então, nesse trabalho da Ana, eu tive a oportunidade de revisitar esses processos com minha mãe e honrar também essa ancestralidade. É isso.
Teresa was telling me that she and her brother accompanied their mother, Dandara, to work until she was 6 years old. So pretty much like the other daughters before they started school. They had nowhere else to go but to follow their mothers to work. And that her early memories are all about leaving home in the dark early in the morning and returning home also in the dark in the evenings. She wanted to study social services, but the course was unavailable in a public university in her hometown, and she had to work full-time and couldn't leave her parents' home because she couldn't afford living costs. So because she had a low-quality public secondary education, she struggled to pass the exams and enter the university, and spent 2 years preparing herself for it after failing on her first attempt. During this period, her parents didn't count on my wages at home, she said, and she ended up being offered a place in a private university. She had to take a bank loan to pay for her matriculation fee because she didn't have the money. Despite being granted a scholarship for her studies, she still had to pay back half of it. And despite starting in 2002, she only settled her debt in 2020. She had to work full-time when she was studying. She studied in the evenings and worked during the day. She also had to work on her family's food stall on Sundays. Her parents were unable to help her financially, but they did all they could to keep their children at school. She told me that her parents helped us as much as they could when they were young to save them to having to have a paid job, so she and her brother could prioritize their studies. Because of that, she was able to finish her education without having to have a paid job until she started university. She dreamed of an academic degree, but everybody around her told her that she needed to pursue a college degree as opposed to an academic one and become a teacher, she recalls. But her mother had a very strong voice and challenged these people, telling them that her daughter could be whatever she wanted to be. Paula is another daughter, and she was telling me about her memories that her mother worked long hours when she was a child, including Saturdays. She was raised by her paternal grandparents from 6 to 15, but her mother corrected, saying that it was from 6 to 13. She also accompanied her mother to work many times when she was little. And she shared that the most remarkable memory she has from her childhood is of her and her mother using public transport in the morning, crowded with people, and her mother carrying her in her arms along with other things she had to carry. And it was a real struggle, she says. She resents her mother not being able to be more present and told me that she wished that her mother could spend more time with her during her childhood. She studied social communication, journalism in a private university, and told me that it was unlikely that she would have a degree without the support she had from her mother and her mother's employer, who helped her to pay for the tuition fees. She lived with her mother when she was preparing to pass the tests and also during university. Now she has an analyst position. She lives alone, has a comfortable life, and is working from home during the pandemic. Elena, another of the daughters, told me that her family lived in the outskirts of the city and depended on the precarious public transport, which made them waste a lot of time to move around the city. She is the youngest of the daughters I interviewed, and because of that, her mother was able to count on free-day childcare available by the time her daughter was born, and that allowed her to work full-time without having to bring her child to work. Her mother worked on weekdays and Saturdays, and the family was only able to meet on Sundays, but the daughter told me that the mother was always busy on Sundays cleaning their own home. And the daughter had her first baby during the pandemic. When I asked her what she would do differently with her child from what she had experienced with her mother, she told me that she would like to create a reading routine at home. Now, as an adult, I suffer a lot because I find it difficult to read a book, she says. But she understands that it's not her mother's fault, that her mother didn't do that for her because nobody did it for her before that. She has a degree in education from the daughter from a private university. She is the only daughter I interviewed that did not achieve financial stability after obtaining a degree, but still has a higher social status comparing to her mother as a primary school teacher. She told me that mother was unhappy with her choice of course because teachers are notable for being badly paid in Brazil, but supported her nonetheless. Julia is the only daughter I interviewed that had to start working early when she was 14. Almost all her wages were used to pay for her tuition fees, and she studied in the evenings, working during the day at McDonald's, and also had to live with her family because she couldn't avoid living costs. Her family helped her emotionally and financially when she wasn't able to pay for her tuition fees, and is the only daughter I interviewed that had a professional degree as opposed to an academic one. She works as shop assistant in a woman's clothes store and has a child with her husband. She was able to purchase her own home before she was 30 years old, something that her mother haven't been able to do yet. I noticed talking with mothers and daughters that while some of the traumatic stories were verbally passed from domestic workers to their daughters, other memories were shared between them as they lived them together, because those daughters had to follow their mothers to work when they were little. I created this concept of which I call intertwined memories, which is that the mother's traumatic memories are counterbalanced by the satisfaction they experience later in life, coming from life achievements of their daughters, both at the personal and professional levels. The mothers live their daughters' positive experiences as if they were their own, carrying these happy memories forward in their lives. The fact their daughters had escaped the fate of being domestic workers like themselves resonates deeply with their mothers, and they feel like their daughter's victory, achieving a higher education degree, is their own victory. Like the genetic pain that is transmitted from mothers to their daughters, the achievements are also shared between this two generations of women, passed from the daughters to their mothers. And I argue that these intertwined memories triggered a great number of efforts from the daughters I interviewed to repair their broken mothers, helping them in the healing process of their mother's emotional scars, and with their own, once they have achieved a better social status or income. Lucia was telling me about her childhood memories and how they were marked by experiences of poverty and deprivation, and her mother's struggle to raise 5 children. She recalls her mother often telling them, "I wish I could jump on a train and run away from here," because she could not cope with the family's difficulties. Her memories are so painful that she decided, she said, not to be a mother herself. She told me her mother was very aggressive and would hit anything that crossed her path. And she told me a story when she was 5 and she and her brother were following her mother to work. Her mother was a school cleaner, and they accidentally broke a mirror from the school. The mother was deranged. She took the children to a dark room, removed their clothes and spanked them, leaving them crying and alone. The head teacher was merciless and made the mother pay for the broken mirror in several installments. The daughter still remembered the name and surname of this head teacher. That really marked her, and she told me that it took several years doing psychotherapy to overcome this experience she had. She also recalls accompanying her mother to the dentist when she was an infant and seeing the dentist using a dirty piece of cloth to clean her mother's mouth when he was extracting her teeth. Her mother ended up losing all her teeth, and Lucia recalls that her mother always said, "Look what life has gifted me," every time she took the prosthetic teeth out. Because of those experiences, Lucia's main concern was to have a job that allowed her to have good dental and medical care for herself and her mother. She told me, "I never care only about myself because I could see my family struggles." She had a strong desire to help her mother, and the stable career as a civil servant allowed her to pay for a private health plan to her mother. And she told me that her mother already benefited from it because she avoided having an unnecessary surgery after seeing a private doctor. She also gifted her parents with a fridge and paid for family holidays together, including her brothers with special needs. She told me the family never had family holidays together when she was a child. And she wished to help her mother further on an emotional level as well. And she had this opportunity during the pandemic because she was able to bring joy to her mother by giving her books to read as well as bringing her DVDs. She told me that her mother never had spare time for herself, and the gifts helped her mother to escape from her reality. For the first time, she saw her mother less worried and nurturing dreams. She told me that her mother told her, "I had forgotten how romantic I am," after reading a Jane Austen's novel that her daughter lended to her. Teresa is another daughter, and she is currently doing her PhD at University of São Paulo. She struggled with the bully she suffered at school because of her Afro hair, but she was quiet about it. I only learned about that from her mother when I was interviewing her mother. Teresa's memories is that the ones she shared with me are about her mother's love and care, and how her mother had a daily routine of caring for her hair every evening after long hours at work. And that helped her to value and to be proud of her Black phenotype, which is a key thing to validate Black women's power. Her mother had this strong role in Teresa's process of self-love and self-definition, which is especially important for Black women to challenge the stereotypical images of themselves. She told me that her mother, always found a way to be present at the school meetings, celebrations, and events, and to clap for me and to tell me that I looked beautiful. She was always a voice saying that things were possible for me. Despite all this support, Teresa was not confident to start university when she was offered a place. Self-love is key, but it's also necessary that Black people occupy spaces of power in society to have representativity and to redefine imaginaries. A teacher encouraged her when she was unsure about going to university. He told her, Teresa, do you know who you are bringing to university with you? You are bringing your father, your mother, the history of your family, your experiences from the samba school and from the Black movement. So she figuratively took her mother and the special people in her life to university with her. She told me it was a good way of arriving at university, carrying this special rucksack, fill it with these special people. Her mother was telling me that one of the best days of her life was when her daughter invited her to her matriculation ceremony when she was offered a place at the University of São Paulo. Her daughter's outstanding achievement was also hers. She told her daughter, daughter, you made it, we made it. She also told me her experience of pregnancy and birth and told me that Teresa came with suffering. She told me that she was advised by a doctor when she was 3 months pregnant that the baby was dead and she was sent to a procedure to remove the dead fetus from her, but she decided not to do it and go back home before proceeding. She never went back to the hospital. She was scared and had no peace of mind until her daughter was born, a healthy baby, the same women I interviewed for my studies. Her birth memories are also traumatic as she had to have a C-section against her will, despite being in good health. The prenatal and birth experiences that she had were not an isolated case, as Black women like her are more likely to have inadequate prenatal and birth care and to be more subject to pain compared to white women, not only in Brazil, but also in the UK. She was highly concerned that her daughter would endure the same challenges when her daughter became pregnant. But thanks to her daughter's better life conditions, she was able to have a natural birth at home. That was her option, accompanied by a skilled professional. Many times, her mother, Dandara, mentioned that all that I couldn't do, my daughter is now able to do. She said that many times in our interviews. Vittoria left her first child to be raised by her mother in the Northeast when she was 1 year old. Mother and daughter were never reunited. When the mother life improved, after migrating, it was too late. The relationship was estranged by the long period apart. Despite all her efforts providing for Claudia when she was younger, her daughter now lives in poverty, lacking basic needs. She was not able to enjoy life as grandmother because of the distance between mother and daughter, geographical and emotional. She had an opposite experience with the daughter that lives with her, Helena, the one that went to university. As when her daughter was a baby, she was looking for a job and her employers offered her to bring the baby to work, even gifting her with a baby coat. And although mother and child stay together, her daughter resents her mother's absence during her childhood and always. But nevertheless, they have a close relationship, and Vittoria had the opportunity to experience motherhood for a second time. After 27 years working for the same family, Vittoria has a comfortable life and is now able to be more present in her daughter's and her grandson's lives. The financial support provided by her allows her daughter to stay with her baby while she's away from her teaching job on maternity leave, sparing her from potential early separation of mother and baby if her daughter had to find additional sources of income. Her daughter is still concerned about her mother's health care and wish she could afford a private medical plan for Vittoria. But the fragility of her social mobility limits the process of overcoming trauma, as Vittoria still feels the weight of helping her daughter towards a better life. And Elena, on return feel that she can't help her mother as she wished. To finish this long presentation, I want to bring some of my research findings. So I argue that as much as the important governmental changes that help with the democratization of higher education in the country, the role of the mothers empowering their daughters to pursue higher education, that is often overlooked, was a key element in this process that led their daughters to social mobility. I use the concept of intertwined memories to explain how these women supported each other in this process that changed the social position of the younger generation and helped mothers and daughters to transform trauma into empowerment. Daughters were driven by their own dreams, but also their mothers. Social mobility and less trauma lifted them towards happier lives, empowering their mothers too. And this open way towards more representativity in the higher education environment by this first generation of university entrants. Social mobility and healing of trauma are likely to create a new generation that will share and carry less trauma, very different from the one that existed before. As paid domestic work is still a woman's job ghetto, it is important to highlight that, because this is one of the main occupations among vulnerable women in the country. And domestic work finds great barriers towards decent work, women empowerment, and gender equality. The pursuit of education by the daughters was motivated by the search of a better life, but it was equally strong, their will to escape from paid domestic work, as they wanted to be the opposite of their mothers, as if distancing themselves from their mothers' life trajectories was a synonym of success. The mothers' sacrifices to support their daughters were driven by the same forces. They wanted their daughters to be the opposite of themselves, and they often downplayed their value and agency, even when they were key agents affecting their daughters' process of social mobility. So there is this paradox that at the same time that the younger generation is escaped from domestic work, is triggering a series of mutual support between mothers and daughters, it also reinforces without intention the widespread perception that paid domestic job is a personal failure, it's not a proper job. The idea that the occupation does not require proper skills, as the talents required are inherent in women's and mothers' natures. This removes agency from domestic workers as class and reinforces gender stereotypes. And it also removes value of reproductive work affecting those benefit by it, such as children. So broader gains are still necessary on the escape from paid domestic work. They must be accompanied by a renewed demand for improved, dignified working conditions for the occupation, which continues to be characterized by high levels of informality and exploitation. My dissertation work for my master's became a book. I was invited to publish my work in Brazil, so the work was translated to Portuguese. And yeah, get in touch. I'm looking forward to hear the questions about my research work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna Maria, for that amazing presentation. Now we are going to take questions. We have some time for questions. So if you have questions, you can put them on the chat, and or also you can raise your hand and you can do your questions live. Also, if we have some questions here in the public, we can take it here. Juliana, do you see some questions there?
No, but I agree with you. If someone wants to ask something, just raise your hand, open your mic, and go ahead, ask.
I'm thinking that I can start with the questions while we get other questions. So I wanted to ask about your process as a researcher in this, in what you have presented and how did you manage maybe the affective relations with your participants and that process?
That was a very fine line between research and human being, because exchanging those recorded messages to these women, they start sending me loads of information that went beyond the things I was asking them. So it kind of developed into kind of a friendship. They send me pictures from their Christmas parties or pictures from their children. And I think that only enriches the work of research, because I ended up gaining some intimacy with them and getting to know them better. And as I was studying those experiences of trauma and abuse and racism, that was key to get the information I wanted to for my research, and also to meet those amazing women. I'm sure we will be friends after that, because they are just amazing women.
And about the process, Teresinha, she asked what was like the main difficulties that you had when you are doing your research.
I think was the global pandemic, for sure, because that was one of the things. So the domestic workers, they have very limited time to check their phones and to speak to me. So they were working more than they were before, especially the one that was living with her employers. So sometimes I would have to wait 2 weeks to have an answer from a question, because she wasn't allowed to use her phone at her employer's house. And also the daughters, many of these women, they ended up having to get COVID. Some of them, they had children during the pandemic, they had the babies. So they had very busy lives, and I'm very grateful that they ended up finding the time to answer my questions. But yeah, that certainly delayed the process of research, having to wait for the answers I needed because of the pandemic.
And Teresinha, she has another question, and she says, if you plan to keep going with your research and compare the problems that Brazilian workers they have with the works of the workers of other countries, like the UK, for example.
Well, I do have plans to continue on my studies. I just received the good news that I was offered a place on a PhD program at the Faculty of Education here at the University of Cambridge. So I do plan to go forward investigating this first generation of women who went to university. My plan for the future is to gather their experiences of discrimination and racism when they went to university. So I don't have any plans to compare with other workers' conditions in other countries, but I do see lots of similarities with this first generation of women who went to university in Brazil, and this first generation of people coming to elite universities such as Cambridge and Oxford. As recently in the UK, there was an increase in the numbers of people coming from state-funded schools being admitted on Cambridge and Oxford that traditionally offered place to people coming from a private school background. I've been following their discussions, and there are lots of things in common about how they struggle to feel accepted and how they struggle to feel like they belong in a very elite and discriminatory sometimes environment that they face when they are here. So I might try to explore a little bit how things are for this first generation of university entrants in the UK as well, since I live here. But at the moment, my focus is with Brazil and women in Brazil.
Yeah, we have many questions. I'm so happy. There's La Terezinha, she said, what were the reasons that made you analyze the relationship between the mothers and the domestic workers and their daughters? And where, I think you said it in the beginning, but can you explain more from your inspiration came from? Where did it come from?
Yeah, sure. Well, the main reason I explore the relationship between mothers and daughters is because domestic work is very gendered. So most people working as domestic workers are women. And in Brazil in particular, some people will argue, and I agree, that it's almost an hereditary situation. Is most women I interviewed, they came from a background, her mothers and grandmothers, they were domestic workers as well. So it is a cycle within women in their families that working women in Brazil experience of being dragged into working in domestic work. And that's the reason why I explore the experiences of their daughters rather than their sons, as I am aware this first generation of university entrants is formed by both men and women. But it is the women who are breaking the cycle of domestic work within their families. And that's why I put my efforts to understand this historical cycle breaking that happens when the daughters were able to pursue, to obtain a university degree and go to a different profession.
And I invite Consul. Consul, would you like to make your question yourself?
I can.
Can you read it for me, because I have a problem with the audio?
If you want.
Okay, then okay. Consul, she says, in terms of social mobility, could you expand if there were difference between daughters studying socioeconomic value, and if this influence, how? No, I did it better. Anna?
Yeah?
I read again. Could you expand if there were difference between daughters studying careers with different social economic value, and if this influence how they experience the results of social mobility?
How they experience their...
Yeah, so I'm coming here. So yes, question is because you mentioned that, for example, someone who studied for being a primary teacher, she wasn't totally happy about how that career could, or she wouldn't earning some money to maintain herself, so she still need help from her mother. Whether others of daughters could like gain like a sufficient salary. So if that difference make them experience higher education in different ways, or it was frustrating for some, and if all could experience social mobility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the experiences were very different, not only between the choice of course and career, but also the difference between studying in a private university and a public one. One of the daughters in particular, the one who was offered a job just before graduating and the offer was canceled, she was very frustrated about her experience of obtaining a degree. That's why she said that the civil servant services is what allowed her to move the social ladder and not the degree she had, because she was highly frustrated when she had depression and she didn't, they take back the job offer they made her at the end of her graduation. So she was definitely frustrated about that. Nevertheless, she did pursue her master's in education and believes in education as a social mobility tool. The one who studied education, she's very passionate about being a primary school teacher. And despite needing the help from her mother, she has a good life. You know, she has a house and she's able to take care of her son. The mother's help is important, but she achieved some financial stability, although very fragile. The one that went to the analyst position is the one who has the most comfortable life, but it's difficult to say if it is a combination of the degree that she has chosen with a bit of luck of going to the right company and passing interviews. The one who is doing her master's degree, her PhD at University of São Paulo, is also very happy with her career possibilities, and she's a mature student. She's older than 40, but that's what she wanted, and she is happy with her decision.
Ana Cristina, Ana Cristina, she commented, she asked about the movie, que horas ela volta. And she says if did it mean any kind of identification or recognition?
Oh, sorry, can you ask again? The movie?
She commented the movie. She says, did it end of identification?
Oh, certainly, yeah. No, they did. That was very inspirational. And the funny thing about that comment is that when I was looking for women to interview for my research, everybody would mention the movie, which in English is called The Second Mother. So, Que Horas Ela Volta. And the beauty of it is that everybody knew a Jessica. Everybody knew somebody who's been through the same that Jessica has been through. And I particularly like this movie very much, not only because it portrays the struggles of the mother, domestic worker who had to leave her daughter behind as well in the northeastern of the country, but it also portrays life of the northeastern women who migrated to São Paulo, like Val did, to work as domestic workers. And it's very interesting. That is has a lot to do with my research, basically. And one of the daughters I interviewed, she recorded a mini documentary. She was invited to record, to be filmed on a short documentary called Jessica's Reais, the real Jessicas. because she is a real Jessica. So before I interviewed her, I watched her video, and I watched other videos from this short called Jessica's Reais, and they are highly inspiring. They're very interesting.
Thank you. I'm Jessica, real Jessica. There's another question. Darshini, I don't know if I did it well, but she's saying, well done, your work is brilliant. And she has a question regarding your relationship with your participants. She says, did the familiarity and intimacy create a sort of impression management where they provide desirable responses to appease you? And if yes, or if so, how did you manage to tease out such depth, especially given to the extent of the trauma? And your positionality being a student from an elite global North university. And she applauds you for doing that.
Yeah, it was not easy. I think one of the things that helped me was to cross the information coming from the mothers and from the daughters. So sometimes if the story was, I don't know, too adequate to what I was keen to hear, when I spoke to the daughter, maybe when I was talking to the mother would tell me something different. Like the example I gave you about one of the mothers when I interviewed her, she was very proud of herself with reason and all the things she'd done for her daughter. And she ended up not mentioning that the daughter didn't live with her for a long period of time when she was a child. I'd only learned that when I spoke to her daughter. And that's way I saw there is a lot of complexities on these women's feelings and the way they experience those trauma and what they want to share with me. What I always had in mind is that these women, especially the mothers, they've been experiencing exploitations from all sides in their lives. So I try not to be one of them as well. When I send them my questions in writing, I send them on a text message. We didn't have intimacy yet. We just met, and after that is that the relationship started to grow, and I gained intimacy. I think I would say that probably more than half of the work, the information I gathered, they came from the answers I received, the text, the messages I received. They're not related to my original questions, simply because they would think of something and send me a message spontaneously. And when I asked them questions about trauma and about the poverty they experienced, I try not to be direct and make them remember things that would hurt them. So most of the stories I shared here today are stories they voluntarily shared with me. And I didn't push them to go deeper into some of their memories, like the one who had to leave her daughter behind in the Northeast. I never asked her about her daughter and how she felt about leaving her behind. Everything I heard from her was from her own decision to share. She shared those information spontaneously. And regarding to being in Cambridge, that's complex as well, because most of those women, they have no idea what Cambridge University is. The daughters have, but the mothers, they don't. So it was not a big deal to them. They were happy that they were speaking to another fellow Brazilian. And one of the daughters was surprised when I called her because I spoke Portuguese. She was relieved and happy to see that I'm from there. We have this in common. I didn't feel like they were trying to impress me or to give me answers that I was looking for. But again, crossing information from mothers and daughters, I came to my own conclusions. But still, especially when you're dealing with other clever women, like many of those women I interviewed, they know what to say, they know the right time to put things. But I think the answers were pretty honest from my perspective as a researcher. And I tried to filter, I removed many of the information I received from them, things that I thought they were not being too honest or maybe directing my research in a different way. And yeah.
Thank you so much. We have more questions, but we don't have enough time. Then we have to close. Or you can speak really fast about a question of Ricardo Sabat. He had to leave. But why do you use the concept of accountability to refer to the daughter's experiences?
Sorry, the concept of accountability.
Yeah, he asks, why do you use the concept of accountability to refer to the daughter's experiences?
I think I mentioned in the beginning when I was talking about Preta Hara's book, that the children made their mothers accountable for their achievements. It might be that. I'm not sure that's what the question is about. Accountability in the sense of role. So what is the having a role, an important role in this process? I am aware that obviously not all mothers have this key role and are accountable for those children's achievements. And obviously they're not accountable for that alone. It's a combination, as I try to show, of combined efforts from mothers and daughters to achieve a better life and social condition to the next generation. So it's accountability in the sense of the important role the mothers had in this process that are often overlooked. And I only came to see this perspective when I was reading the testimonials on the Me Domestic Worker hashtag campaign, because if you see most of the studies about this first generation university entrants, most of them will make those governmental programs accountable for those for this progress, for this change, for this transformation that widen access to higher university in Brazil. And so in this sense of the role of their mothers and families in general, helping them through that.
So thank you so much, Anna. Thank you, everyone. And I will give the mic to Consul. And Consul, you are...
Yes, we have a couple of more questions, but we are gonna have to close here. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Anna Maria, for this fantastic presentation. It has been like a pleasure to hear about your work. And a reminder that the recording of this session is going to be in our website, and you can check there the other information for our next seminars. We have a small change in the term card for this term, but we are going to go back to have more presentations next term. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon in our next seminar. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you. Close it, Alex, here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yes, I think there was your...